The second phase banners for version 5.1 have been revealed and it's actually kinda good. So for the character banner, we have a Hu Tao and Nahida rerun, and the rated up 4 stars are Kuki Shinobu, Xingqiu, and Sethos. Meanwhile, the weapon banner has Staff of Homa, Thousand Floating Dreams, and the 4 stars are the Fav Bow, the Lion's Roar, Eye of Perception, Dragon's Bane, and the new Claymore, the Fruitful Hook. So, quick disclaimer, I'm going to assume that you know the basics of what most of these characters and weapons do, and for banner reviews moving forward from now, I'm going to keep things as simple as possible while ensuring that I don't miss out on any info. Now let's get straight to the character banner. So Hu Tao, I already talked about her and where she stands in the current meta, so feel free to go check that video out on the top right section of this video, or go check the link down in the description below. But the TLDR for her is that she is still pretty good, it's just that we simply have better options. Also, animation cancel is something that you have to learn to master if you really want to maximize her damage when it comes to like endgame content, and this may not be ideal for some people. Also, her best team is the Plunge Vape team, which requires 2 other 5-star units being Furina and Shen Yun. For Nahida, I didn't make a shoot you pull video, but I'll just quickly go over like whatever info that you may need to consider whether you should pull for her or not. So Nahida's role is synonymous to Dendro. If you play Dendro, she is the best support that we have, otherwise she's not a must pull or a need for your account. The general consensus for her is that she is the best out of all Dendro supports that we have in the game when you compare her to someone like Heizou, Dendro Traveler, and Kolei. The only downside is that her Dendro application cannot be reapplied if you're going against multi-wave content, especially if you're running a team that doesn't allow you to swap off your active character. An example for this is any Sino teams in general, but otherwise she is very much a staple for all Dendro teams. She's gonna be your upgrade or your best option you have for supports if you really want a good Dendro support. Now for the 4 stars, we have Kuki Shinobu. She is the F2P variant for a Hyper Bloom unit. She does a lot of damage with Hyper Bloom, and she does offer some healing to your active character, which does add up to your survivability. She's very easy to build. You just run triple EM, and if you want to run onset, you can maybe run like 2 Wondrous Troop, 2 Gilded, or maybe you can run 4 Gilded. You want to run 4 Tenacity or with some 4 Maidens, it doesn't really matter as long as you do have enough EM to make sure that she heals enough and you trigger Hyper Bloom and make sure that it does lots of damage. Her most important constellations are C2 and C6. C2 makes her skill last as long as her cooldown, so giving her theoretically infinite uptime. C6 lets her survive lethal damage and the ability goes on a 1-minute cooldown. Also, whenever her HP goes below 25%, she gains 125 Elemental Mastery, which also goes on a 1-minute cooldown. The EM buff is less important to the ability that allows her to cheat death because it lets her survive against especially hard-hitting enemies, especially like the ones that you will go against in things like the Spiral Abyss. Now, Xingqiu is one of the best units in the game, consolidating multiple roles. He is a great Hydro Applicator, he gives damage reduction with his Rain Swords, he provides a little bit of healing whenever the Rain Swords break, and he does give a bit of interrupt resist, which makes your character less vulnerable to stagger. He is generally used in lots of teams that require Hydro in general, notably the Vaporized team for characters like Hu Tao, which is in the banner, and Arlecchino, and also Hyper Bloom and Burgeon. His most notable constellations are C2 and C6. So C2 makes his burst last all the way to 18 seconds, making it one of the longest abilities in the game, and it also decreases the enemy's Hydro resistance whenever they are hit by the Rain Swords generated from his burst. C6 generally just makes his burst do more damage because it spawns more Rain Swords, and this also strengthens his Hydro application, thus making it even stronger. He also regains some amount of energy whenever his Rain Swords hit. If you generally need a really good off-field Hydro applicator and your DPS character utilizes normal attack, Xingqiu might actually just be the unit for you. So Sethos is a very fun DPS, but he is also very skill intensive. He has a very fun playstyle which you can alternate between the normal attack spam, the charge attack spam, or a hybrid between both. His performance is generally quite good, and with enough investment, he can compete with some of the Electro 5-star DPS that we have out there. He is generally F2P friendly. His best artifact set is the Wondrous Troop, which you can get from killing overworld bosses, weekly bosses, and you can also claim it from the Strongbox. One of his best weapons is the Slingshot, which is a 3-star gacha weapon, which is a standard weapon, which most people would get as long as you're able to pull the gacha. He is a perfectly fine unit at C0. He does get stronger with constellations, but the gain is not going to be as insane versus some of the other 4-star units out there. His most notable constellations are C1, C2, and C6. So C1 adds 15% crit rate to his charge attack. It's a nice buff to his charge attack playstyle, but it doesn't really do anything for his normal attack spam. C2 gives Sethos electro bonus if he does any of the following. One is that he uses burst, 2 is he consumes energy to shoot out a charge attack, and 3 is he regains energy whenever his skill triggers an elemental reaction. And lastly, Constellation 6 gives him a free charge attack with no energy cost since it provides a refund. This generally helps you with energy management. It is extremely good for all his playstyles because it allows you to fire one extra shot for his charge attack build, and for the normal attack spam, you can actually fire a few charge shots, granted you have enough energy recharge, which does add up to your overall damage. Now, for the weapon banner, the Staff of Homa is a very good generalist DPS polearm with quite a few uses that actually want it. Aside from Hu Tao herself, Shengling, being the Spear Archon, also likes this weapon. One of the examples that I can use is probably Xiao, because my Xiao is currently using the Staff of Homa and it's not on my Hu Tao. It has a very high base attack, very high crit damage. It also adds a little bit of HP to your character, making them a little bit tankier. And the passive is an unconditional attack bonus, which you gain based on a portion of your wielder's max HP. If your health is below half, the attack bonus becomes even stronger. And then we have the 1000 Floating Dreams. The 1000 Floating Dreams, being Nahida's weapon, is an okay 5-star weapon, but its performance is quite disappointing given the other options that we have. It gives you a low base attack and a lot of elemental mastery, which is useful if you want to put it on someone like Nahida. The passive itself is mostly useful for the user and not so much for the other team members despite the EM buff. Okay, so I had to kind of check whether EFD or 1000 Floating Dreams was going to be better than the other options. So obviously we have the Hyper Bloom Double Electro team compared to a Refinement 5 Sacrificial Fragments here, and then we have a Refinement 5 Wandering Even Star. Now this is mostly taking into account Nahida's personal damage. The team damage wise, I can't exactly calculate with this website, so here is what I found. Now, considering her talents at level 90, talent is 999 at C0. Obviously, the personal damage for 1000 Floating Dreams is going to be her best in slot. And according to Kaching mains, it's also her best in slot for off-field personal damage. Like Fragments is like 20% worse, and then Even Star is like about 19 or 20% worse, maybe a bit better than Fragments, but not really by that much. But of course, her damage is not something you generally want to consider too much when you have her at C0. Not to say that she does 0 damage. She does contribute quite a bit of damage, especially if you do run on field, but usually if you run Nahida in a Hyper Bloom team or Burgeon team, so unless you run a team where she is built to be the on-field main DPS, you're not really gonna benefit that much from pulling something like 1000 Floating Dreams. And to be honest, it's much better that you actually go for her Constellation 2, which I'm gonna demonstrate how much better C2 is, by the way. Okay, so I had to turn off both the buff and the debuff for C2 for Aggravate, Spread, Hyper Bloom, Quicken, and all I did was basically took a Sacrificial Fragment build and put on C2. You can see that it's only like 4% or 5% worse in terms of like a DPS build for Nahida compared to 1000 Floating Dreams, and even considering her elemental skill, the press and hold is like only 5%, but the actual like off-field tri-karma damage is actually 6% better. And if you look at reaction damage, you gain like a 14% damage difference when you compare it to all like the 1000 Floating Dreams C0 build. So honestly, like it's not a weapon worth going for unless you already have C2, or maybe you're just a Nahida enjoyer and you want to go for it. Well, you can just go ahead, but just saying that in terms of what is worth your Primogems, C2 is going to offer a bigger damage buff for all Nahida teams, more so than getting 1000 Floating Dreams. The Favonius Warbow, I don't really have to say much about it. The entire Favonius family is pretty strong in general. It has a massive ER substat. It gives you free energy to the whole team from the passive alone. The only caveat of the whole series is that you have to build a bit of crit rate, but it's not really that big of a deal if you run a crit rate circlet or you have a lot of crit substats. And the thing is, we do have quite a lot of bow support characters, so you'll never have enough Favonius weapons regardless of where you go if you do have these units. The Lion's Roar is generally a niche weapon, and it's only worth using or notable on someone like a Qing. It's generally not that great on other units simply because we don't really have other DPS that can take advantage of it. But otherwise, for any Kaching users out there, a Refinement 5 Lion's Roar is pretty good on her if you have a good enough crit stat and you're able to maintain the passive. So the Dragon's Bane are notable on a few units. Hu Tao, Xiangling, EM Raiden, and EM Homa. The passive is mostly usable on the first 2 units being Hu Tao and Xiangling. Otherwise, this is purely an EM stat stick for someone like EM Raiden and EM Homa, granted you have enough energy for him to use his burst. The Eye of Perception is a weapon that most people don't want, and it is obvious why, because it's generally a weapon that is not worth mentioning. We do have better options out there, and the passive would be good if only it wasn't on a long cooldown. Now, the Fruitful Hook is the new Claymore, so let me go over what it does. So it adds 16% crit rate for your plunging attacks. I assume this would be 24% or 32% if you have it at Refinement 5. And after your plunge attack hits, you will get a damage bonus for your normal, charge, and plunging attacks. I would say the most notable user for this, and probably the best one, is gonna be Tiaming, and it's only usable on other Claymore users if you have Shen Yun to enable their plunges. I'm unsure how much better this could be compared to like a higher refinement Serpent Spine. I think it's safe to say that this is definitely a Claymore that is weight for Tiaming. Maybe we will be getting a new plunging attack DPS in the future that'll be using a Claymore, but for now I think it's a very niche weapon only for him, and it's definitely a good option if you don't want to deal with something like the Serpent Spine and you have energy recharge to not need to use the Favonius Claymore. Otherwise, I think that's it for the banner review. So let me know what you guys think, whether you guys intend to pull this weapon banner, or are you guys waiting for future banners like the Pyro Archon or Chaska and Auroron, etc. Otherwise, that's it for now. Peace!